Joseph Goebbels was the voice of Nazi Germany. As Hitler's propaganda minister, he controlled German media and shaped what the public saw and heard. Millions knew him as a loyal family man and one of the most powerful figures in the regime. But his private life told a different story. Behind closed doors, Goebbels conducted affairs that contradicted everything he publicly preached. He demanded purity while pursuing actresses whose careers he controlled. He praised family loyalty while betraying his wife repeatedly. According to accounts from his staff and diary entries, he used his position to pressure women into relationships. This is a story about lust and power, and how the two became inseparable in one man's life. His private diaries, discovered in the ruins of Berlin in 1945, and translated by journalist Louis P. Lochner, reveal a disturbing pattern. According to historian Peter Longerich's analysis, the same methods he used in personal relationships paralleled his propaganda techniques. Both relied on identifying vulnerability, creating false closeness, and maintaining control through psychological pressure. His diaries suggest that every conquest, whether romantic or political, temporarily satisfied his deep need for validation. But the satisfaction never lasted. Evidence from these records indicates his relationships followed a consistent pattern: identify weakness, exploit it, dominate. Whether his target was an actress or an entire population, the approach remained identical. Section 1. Behind the perfect image. According to Lochner's translation, Goebbels kept detailed diaries from 1925 onward, continuing until the final days of the war. The entries from 1925, when he was 28 years old, reveal particularly striking patterns about his relationships with women. At this point, he was a failed writer living in poverty, desperately seeking recognition. His entries from this period reveal that his relationships with women followed a disturbing pattern. He was pursuing 5 different women at the same time: Alma, Elsa, Anke, and 2 others he never named. He wrote about each with desperate longing one day, then bitter contempt the next. On August 27, 1925, he wrote that he pined for Elsa constantly and stood by the Rhine River waiting for her to appear. He described feeling utterly alone despite pursuing multiple women at once. His diary entries over the following months showed deepening bitterness. By August 1926, when Elsa and others had failed to respond to his letters, he wrote that he now preferred his dog Benno to any human company. The pattern documented in his diaries was consistent: idealization, then conquest, then immediate loss of interest, then loneliness, then pursuit of the next target. By December 1925, he wrote explicitly that there seemed to be a curse connecting him to women. He could not maintain genuine feelings once someone reciprocated his interest. The moment he possessed someone emotionally, attraction vanished completely. This was not normal romantic disappointment, but a pattern that, according to his own records, would persist for his entire life. What drove this behavior? The answer appears repeatedly in his early entries. He was born with a club foot that caused a noticeable limp throughout his life. In an era valuing physical perfection, particularly in Germany's militaristic culture, this disability became an overwhelming source of shame. According to biographers, he was excluded from military service and felt conscious of the stigma throughout his life. His diaries document how this rejection during these formative years created wounds that never healed. Therefore, he turned to intellectual pursuits as compensation. He earned a doctorate in literature from Heidelberg in 1920 and wrote novels and plays, seeing himself as an artist and intellectual destined for recognition. However, the literary world rejected him at every turn as publishers returned his manuscripts. Theaters showed no interest, and the validation he desperately sought never came. These combined rejections shaped his worldview dramatically. In his diary entries, he expressed deep hatred of humanity, writing that being with another person for 3 days made him dislike them, and a week made him hate them. He described humans as worthless and contemptible. These entries show not philosophy, but the documented result of years of rejection and failure. Yet, he also revealed moments of self-awareness about his condition, recognizing the curse even though his writings suggest it did not lead to change. Instead, his diaries indicate it led to a more calculated approach to human relationships. If he could not feel genuine connection, he would perfect the performance of connection. If he could not love, he would master the appearance of love. When he met Adolf Hitler for the first time, everything changed. Goebbels first learned about Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party in 1923. He joined the movement between 1924 and 1926, during which time his worldview underwent a dramatic transformation. When he finally met Hitler personally, his diary entry from that encounter shows something striking. He described Hitler's large blue eyes as being like stars, and wrote that Hitler squeezed his hand like an old friend. Most significantly, he described himself as supremely happy in Hitler's presence, using language more passionate and intimate than anything he had written about any of the 5 women he was pursuing. This encounter marked the beginning of a dependence that would last until both men died. As historian Peter Longerich's research demonstrates, Goebbels never developed independence from his mother during crucial early childhood years, creating a lifelong pattern of seeking validation from authority figures. Longerich's analysis suggests Hitler became the ultimate source of this validation. Praise from him inspired Goebbels to extraordinary efforts, while the slightest hint of disapproval crushed him completely. Within months, Goebbels rose rapidly within the Nazi Party and became Gauleiter of Berlin in 1926, tasked with establishing party dominance in the capital against communist rivals. He proved ruthlessly effective. Observers noted he understood that politics was theater. Every rally, every speech, every poster was designed for maximum emotional impact. His diaries reveal he had learned from his failures as an artist that literal truth mattered less than emotional perception. People believed what they were made to feel. Moreover, Goebbels documented something crucial about his romantic failures. As he later reflected, as he gained political power, he noticed a dramatic change in how women responded to him. His diary entries suggest women who might have rejected the struggling writer now showed interest in the rising Nazi leader. This pattern appeared to confirm his suspicions about human nature, leading him to conclude that power was the ultimate attraction, creating desire more effectively than any personal qualities. His writings indicate he internalized this lesson completely. To be wanted, he needed to be feared. His own words reveal he could not love, only possess. He could not connect, only control. Power, not personality, determined whether others accepted or rejected him, and his diaries show he had learned this lesson completely. These early diaries, written before he had any political authority, prove something important according to Longerich's analysis. His later behavior as propaganda minister was not corrupted by power. The corruption was already there, waiting for power to amplify it. Section 2. Insecurity and ambition. When Hitler appointed Goebbels as Reich Minister of Propaganda in March 1933, he gained control over Germany's entire cultural apparatus. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, theater productions, publishing houses, and most significantly, the film industry, all fell under his authority. Historical records show he involved himself deeply in film production and censorship decisions, wielding significant influence over casting, storylines, and distribution. Staff members recalled that film held a particular importance for him. The film industry became his private domain, and within that domain, he exercised power extending into every aspect of people's lives. The connection between professional authority and romantic behavior was direct and systematic. Every actress working in German films during the Nazi era operated under Goebbels' control as head of the Reich Film Chamber, with careers depending on his approval. Historians argue that this power dynamic made genuine consent impossible in these relationships. A single negative word from him could end someone's livelihood. And historical evidence shows Goebbels used his position to pressure both women and men in the industry. When actor Ferdinand Marion initially refused to play the lead role in the anti-Semitic propaganda film Jude Süß, historical accounts show he was reluctant for nearly a year. According to records, Goebbels applied various forms of pressure, including financial incentives, and Marion eventually accepted the role. Whether through career threats, economic persuasion, or other forms of intimidation, the power imbalance made refusal extremely difficult. This level of control created an environment where meaningful consent became impossible. Women who wanted to work in their chosen profession, support themselves or families, or who had invested years developing their craft, all knew Goebbels determined their fate completely. When the man controlling the entire film industry expressed personal interest in an actress, she faced an impossible situation. Historical evidence indicates this was not romance between equals, but systematic exploitation backed by state power. Consequently, historians argue Goebbels' affairs were not simply about romantic attraction, but expressions of power and dominance. According to Longerich's analysis, each conquest proved he could take what he wanted, while each submission validated his authority and desirability. His behavior toward women in his immediate office contrasted dramatically with his treatment of actresses. Staff testimonies suggest he treated secretaries with formal coldness, showing little personal interest in their lives. This distinction appears revealing in retrospect. The women in his immediate office had no value for him because conquering them would not validate his power since they were already completely subordinate. The challenge lay in pursuing women who had independent fame and status. Moreover, as Longerich's analysis reveals, Goebbels' narcissism required constant external validation. His behavior was driven by insatiable need for confirmation, particularly during times of crisis, which he could satisfy through two sources: winning Hitler's approval and proving his desirability through romantic conquests. Longerich argues the two sources of validation were directly connected in his psychology, as success with women reassured him of his worth, while Hitler's praise confirmed his importance. Together, they temporarily filled the void created by his insecurity. While specific diary passages remain difficult to verify, his wartime records suggest an obsession with image and perception. He measured his worth through others' responses, tracking crowd reactions to speeches, noting when Hitler praised him, and recording attention he received at social events. This constant monitoring indicates someone lacking internal sense of self-worth, who existed only in reflection from others. Without their admiration, his diaries suggest, he felt he was nothing. Longerich observes that the methods he used to pursue women paralleled exactly his campaign techniques. Both relied on flattery, repetition, and creation of false intimacy. In propaganda, he learned to tell people what they wanted to hear, make them feel special, and create emotional connections bypassing rational thought. Accounts from observers suggest he employed similar tactics in personal pursuit, making women feel chosen, unique, and valued while creating the illusion of genuine feeling. Then, once he achieved his goal, the performance ended abruptly. This parallel suggests that what he demanded from women in private, he demanded from nations in public: submission disguised as devotion, surrender presented as loyalty, and dominance framed as protection. This pattern intensified during the war years, as Germany's military situation deteriorated from 1942 onward, and the regime's crimes became harder to conceal. Goebbels' behavior grew more compulsive. According to his diary entries from this period, he spent time with actresses and performers when he should have been managing wartime campaigns. The contradictions in his life had become glaring. He wrote propaganda demanding total sacrifice from ordinary Germans, enduring rationing, bombing, and casualties, while living in luxury across multiple properties financed by state funds. He preached family values and marital fidelity in broadcasts, while conducting affairs that were common knowledge within the ministry. He condemned others for behavior identical to his own, expressing public outrage when diplomats were criticized for taking female companions on Sunday trips and wasting precious fuel. The hypocrisy was absolute. His diaries from this period reveal a man who rejected conventional morality when it conflicted with his desires or the regime's needs. Morality was situational, whatever served his needs, with rules applying to others, but never to him. Staff observations suggest that as the war dragged on and Germany's position worsened, his emotional capacity seemed to diminish further. They noted his increasing coldness as he worked continuously, drove subordinates without mercy, and showed no signs of genuine human connection except to Hitler. The mask he had constructed over decades was no longer something he removed, but had become his actual face. Section 3. The Marriage Illusion. Back in December 1931, Joseph Goebbels married Magda Quandt, who represented everything he sought. She was wealthy from her previous marriage to industrialist Günther Quandt, one of Germany's richest men, and moved effortlessly in sophisticated social circles. She was beautiful, blonde and possessed exactly the appearance Nazi ideology celebrated. Most importantly, she had Hitler's explicit approval. However, the marriage was not simple romance. According to Longerich's biographical research, the arrangement involved Hitler directly, as he had developed romantic feelings for Magda before she became involved with Goebbels. In a carefully negotiated settlement, Hitler formally gave up his interest and officially approved the marriage. From the beginning, Hitler was treated as an intimate family member, with this triangular dynamic becoming the foundational structure of the household. Hitler served as best man at their wedding, symbolically giving away the bride in a ceremony that was a propaganda showcase, carefully photographed for public consumption. The message was clear. This was not merely a private union, but a public symbol of Nazi values. The public image they created was masterful publicity, as the Goebbels family became known as the first family of the Reich. Carefully staged photographs showed them as the model household with devoted parents, obedient children, and domestic harmony. Magda played her role perfectly in public, appearing at state functions, hosting important guests, and presenting herself as the ideal German mother. The couple's villa on Schwanenwerder Island became a showcase of Nazi domesticity. Radio features described their family life in glowing terms, while women's magazines held up Magda as the model all German wives should emulate. The 6 children, Helga, Hilde, Helmut, Holde, Hedda, Heide, appeared in newsreels representing the Reich's future. Their names all began with H. While some have speculated this was a tribute to Hitler, historians note this may have followed a naming tradition from Magda's first marriage, and the exact motivation remains debated. Everything was calculated to inspire ordinary Germans, as newspaper articles described domestic scenes of the minister with his children or Magda organizing household activities. It was carefully constructed fiction. Magda herself was performing as much as her husband. Her background included complexity, as she had been married before and had a son, Harold, from her first marriage. She was sophisticated, politically aware, and ambitious. According to historical accounts, she had been drawn to National Socialism before meeting Goebbels, attending rallies and becoming interested in Hitler personally. Her marriage gave her proximity to Hitler, which historians suggest may have been part of her motivation, making her not simply a passive figure, but an active participant in the propaganda machine. However, the private reality bore no resemblance to the propaganda image. Tensions plagued the marriage from early days, with jealousy erupting frequently. Goebbels' diary entries from the war years reveal Magda often lived outside Berlin with the children for extended periods, maintaining essentially a separate household. When she appeared at official functions, it was clearly for public relations, as staff members noted social events seemed incomplete without her presence, but her absence was frequent. Throughout the 1930s and into the war years, Goebbels pursued affairs with increasing boldness. His position gave him total control over Germany's film industry, which he used systematically to gain access to actresses. The pattern documented by observers was consistent. He would fixate on a woman whose career he controlled, pursue her intensely, and once the affair was established, his interest would fade before moving to the next conquest. As staff later recalled, Goebbels was surrounded constantly by actresses and models, while office staff made jokes about his behavior, all related to women. The affairs were common knowledge within his ministry, and no one thought poorly of him for it, as people treated it as normal behavior for a powerful man. This acceptance enabled such behavior to continue unchecked. The power dynamic in these relationships cannot be ignored. Goebbels controlled which actresses received roles, determined which projects received funding, and could promote careers or destroy them. Women working in the German film industry operated entirely under his authority, where refusal of his advances could mean professional ruin or worse, while acceptance might offer protection or advancement. The choice was never truly free. Some women may have resisted initially, but found themselves pressured through indirect channels, according to accounts from that era. Others may have accepted to protect their positions, while still others may have recognized the danger of refusal in a totalitarian state where Goebbels controlled not just careers but resources, travel permits, and protection. The film industry operated as his personal domain for pursuing relationships. One affair, however, became impossible to hide. By the late 1930s, Goebbels began a relationship with Lida Barova, a Czech actress. Unlike previous affairs, this one appears to have involved genuine feeling. People close to the situation believed Goebbels truly loved Barova. The relationship was serious enough that ending his marriage was discussed openly, and Goebbels maintained a private apartment within the propaganda ministry building, elegantly furnished, specifically for conducting this relationship. The affair became public knowledge within Nazi leadership as Magda confronted her husband, and the situation escalated until Hitler had to intervene personally. In 1938, as Germany prepared to annex the Sudetenland, Hitler found the public scandal unacceptable since the Goebbels family served as the Reich's model family in propaganda. Ending the marriage would undermine this carefully constructed image at a critical political moment. Therefore, Hitler intervened directly as the third person in the marriage arrangement. He summoned both Joseph and Magda and dictated terms for continuing the marriage, ordering Goebbels to end the affair with Barova immediately and maintain the public fiction of the happy family. He chose political power over personal desire, as Barova was forced to leave Germany. The relationship ended not because Goebbels chose to end it, but because Hitler commanded it. The consequences of this forced choice were significant. As Longerich documents, Goebbels' emotional life became numb after 1938 as he grew increasingly isolated, stopped maintaining friendships from his youth, and adopted a distant attitude toward everyone except Hitler. Longerich's analysis suggests the man who had desperately sought connection seemed incapable of genuine intimacy, with the marriage from that point forward becoming purely transactional and maintained for political purposes only. Magda's position in this arrangement was complex. She remained loyal to the marriage structure, but evidence suggests her loyalty was directed more toward Hitler than toward her husband, as she spent days, sometimes weeks, alone with Hitler as his guest at various residences. Goebbels noted these absences in his diaries with what historians describe as a detached tone, using flat language when describing other unpleasant but unavoidable aspects of his position. Whatever the exact nature of Magda's relationship with Hitler, Goebbels accepted it as the price of maintaining his political position. The 6 children born to this marriage were tools as much as offspring. They were trained to say pleasant things to Uncle Adolf when he visited and appeared regularly in propaganda photographs and newsreels, representing Nazi Germany's future in official imagery. Yet observers noted Goebbels never seemed to view his children as particularly important personally, since they were props in the performance of his life, serving a propaganda function. By contrast, Magda seemed to invest more emotional energy in the children according to staff observations. Historians describe her as deeply devoted to Hitler and the Nazi movement, viewing the children as part of her contribution to the regime. Their existence validated her role, and when social events occurred at the villa, staff noted Magda's presence brought charm and warmth. Without her, something essential was missing from the performance, since she understood how to perform the role of hostess and mother for maximum propaganda effect. The Goebbels marriage functioned as a perfect metaphor for the regime itself. Behind smiling family portraits lay the same corruption poisoning the entire state. The appearance of harmony concealed manipulation and betrayal, while the promise of traditional values masked deep moral decay. The marriage endured not because of love or mutual respect, but because ending it would expose the basic lie at the center of Nazi ideals, that the leaders embodied the virtues they demanded of ordinary citizens. What the German public saw in newspapers and newsreels was fiction. What existed behind closed doors was a loveless arrangement maintained through Hitler's command, serving political purposes while both parties pursued separate interests. The Perfect Nazi Family was perhaps the most successful campaign lie Goebbels ever created, precisely because he lived it daily while knowing it was entirely false. Section 4. The Minister's Obsessions. According to Longerich's analysis, the methods Goebbels used in propaganda and in personal relationships were identical in structure and purpose. Both relied on identifying what the target desired, creating the illusion of offering it, and then withdrawing once control was established. Both required careful study of emotional vulnerabilities and treated human beings as objects to be manipulated. rather than individuals with autonomy. In his role as propaganda minister, Goebbels studied German anxieties obsessively. He identified fears about economic instability, cultural decline, and national humiliation, then crafted messages promising to address these fears through Nazi ideology. He created emotional resonance through repetition, staging, and carefully calibrated rhetoric, where the goal was not to inform, but to manipulate feeling. Truth was irrelevant, as only emotional impact mattered. In his personal pursuits, he employed the same methods according to accounts from those who observed him. He would study a woman carefully before approaching her, identifying what she wanted: career advancement, financial security, social status, or simply survival in an increasingly dangerous environment. He would then create the illusion of offering exactly that through his attention and promises. Once he had achieved his objective, the promises evaporated. The parallel was not coincidental, as historians argue. Goebbels understood that all human interaction involved performance and manipulation. He rejected the concept of authentic connection as naive sentimentality. In his worldview, shaped by years of rejection and resentment, all relationships were transactions, and all interactions were power struggles. The only question was whether you were the manipulator or the manipulated. This philosophy extended to how he viewed Hitler and their relationship, according to evidence in his diaries. Despite the passionate language in his early diary entries about Hitler, evidence suggests even this relationship was transactional in Goebbels' mind. He needed Hitler's approval to maintain his position and sense of worth, while Hitler provided that approval in exchange for Goebbels' propaganda services and absolute loyalty. When Hitler intervened in his marriage in 1938, Goebbels complied not out of genuine devotion, but because the cost of refusal was too high. His diaries from 1942 and 1943, documented by Lochner, reveal the calculated nature of even his most seemingly personal relationships. He recorded conversations with Hitler in meticulous detail, analyzing what pleased or displeased the Führer. He noted when his speeches received positive responses from crowds and when they fell flat. He tracked Magda's moods and behaviors as one might track weather patterns, noting information without emotional investment. The only consistent emotional thread in these wartime diaries was his deep loneliness. Despite being surrounded constantly by people, wielding enormous power, and having affairs, family, and proximity to Hitler, he repeatedly wrote about feeling empty and alone. The validation he received never lasted more than hours, as the applause faded and the conquests became meaningless almost immediately. His own words indicate nothing filled the void. By 1943, as Germany's military situation deteriorated, his need for validation intensified dramatically. His diary entries from this period, particularly from September 1943, reveals someone whose carefully constructed equilibrium was fracturing. He spent more time with Hitler seeking reassurance, pursued relationships with actresses more compulsively, worked longer hours, drove subordinates harder, and showed increasing signs of strain. In September 1943, he recorded spending an entire day with Hitler at military headquarters. They walked together in the morning, dined privately, and after dinner, talked for hours. After midnight, after other officials had left, Hitler asked him to stay longer, and they walked through the headquarters until 4 in the morning, discussing the war situation. Before Goebbels left, Hitler specifically requested that he visit at least once per week, even if there was nothing urgent to discuss, saying he found these conversations relaxing and comforting. This entry is revealing. By this point in the war, Hitler was increasingly isolated and paranoid, trusting almost no one. Despite this, he still sought out Goebbels' company for emotional comfort, not just political advice. For Goebbels, this validated his sense of unique importance to Hitler, confirming his fantasy that he occupied a special position no one else could fill. Meanwhile, Magda's presence in his diary entries during 1943 was minimal. In 9 months of detailed daily records, he mentioned her approximately 5 or 6 times, each mention being functional: logistics about children, social arrangements, or practical household matters. There was no emotional content, no affection, no partnership. She had become, in his writing and apparently in his life, essentially irrelevant, except as a propaganda tool. This contrast between his extensive writing about Hitler and his near-complete silence about Magda reveals his true priorities. Hitler remained the center of his emotional life. Magda was furniture. The affairs with actresses were temporary distractions. His children were props. Only Hitler mattered, and even that relationship was built on need rather than genuine connection. As the war situation worsened through 1944 and into 1945, Goebbels' behavior became increasingly erratic, according to staff observations. He alternated between manic energy and deep depression, delivered speeches with fanatical intensity, then returned to his office and sat in silence for hours. He pursued women with desperate urgency, then showed no interest once they gave in. The patterns that had characterized his life intensified as the end approached. What staff members witnessed was someone whose entire sense of self was collapsing along with the regime. Without power, he was nothing. Without Hitler's approval, he had no worth. Without the constant validation from conquests, crowds, and subordinates, the void at his core became unbearable. He was watching everything that gave his life meaning disintegrate, and he had no internal resources to cope with this loss because he had never developed any. The propaganda machine he had built and controlled for 12 years was failing. The lies he had told for so long were being exposed by reality. The military victories he had proclaimed were revealed as defeats. The invincible Reich he had promoted was crumbling, and with each failure of his propaganda, his sense of competence and worth diminished further. By early 1945, according to staff testimonies, he seemed almost detached from reality at times. He continued working obsessively, writing speeches and directives that increasingly had no practical purpose, maintaining the performance even though the audience had disappeared. This was not dedication to ideology or loyalty to Hitler, but someone who literally did not know how to exist without the performance. The mask had become his only face. Section 5. The Fall of Illusions. By April 1945, Soviet forces were fighting in Berlin's streets. Allied bombers had reduced much of the city to rubble. The once magnificent ministry buildings where Goebbels had exercised power were skeletal ruins. The entire infrastructure of the Nazi state had collapsed, yet in the bunker system beneath the Reich Chancellery, Goebbels maintained his position beside Hitler, performing loyalty until the very end. Brunhilde Pomsel witnessed these final weeks from inside the bunker complex. In her memoir published decades later, she described the atmosphere as surreal and claustrophobic, where staff continued typing documents that no one would read, filed reports that served no purpose, and maintained routines that had become meaningless rituals. Everyone understood the war was lost, but no one dared say it aloud. Goebbels himself seemed to exist in a state of denial mixed with fanatical determination, according to Pomsel's account. He delivered radio speeches proclaiming imminent victory, even as explosions shook the bunker walls, issued propaganda directives to newspapers that had stopped publishing, and planned campaigns for a film industry that no longer existed. The performance continued even though the stage had collapsed. Throughout this period, his devotion to Hitler never wavered. As Longerich's research emphasizes, his dependence on Hitler was the single strongest force in his life. He had professed his love for Hitler repeatedly in his diaries over 2 decades. While Hitler had systematically exploited this dependence, understanding exactly how to manipulate Goebbels. Now, as Hitler prepared for the end, Goebbels prepared to follow. Meanwhile, Magda Goebbels faced her own reckoning. She had built her entire identity around being part of Hitler's inner circle. The children she had borne represented her offering to the ideology. Her marriage had been maintained because Hitler demanded it, and her social position depended entirely on the regime's survival. With that regime collapsing, she confronted a future she found unbearable. The decision regarding the children appears to have been made jointly by Joseph and Magda, though the exact conversations remain unclear. What is certain is that they concluded none of their family should survive Hitler's passing. Historians characterize both Joseph and Magda as fanatically devoted to Hitler, with Magda in particular described as one of his most loyal followers. With their leader gone and the regime collapsed, they saw no future for themselves or their children. As Pomsel later recalled with horror, Magda had clear opportunity to save the children's lives. Aviator Hanna Reich had personally offered to fly them out of Berlin and could have evacuated all 6 children before the final Soviet attack made escape impossible. Magda refused absolutely, as the children would remain with their parents. This decision revealed the depth of devotion that had consumed both parents. In their final hours, Joseph and Magda Goebbels moved through their preparations with ritual precision. They were staging their exit as carefully as they had staged everything else in their lives. Goebbels wrote a farewell letter to Harold Quandt, Magda's son from her first marriage, who was serving in the military. In this letter, he claimed that his passing would send a signal to the world, believing that by following Hitler's example, he would confirm for all time the special relationship he had with his idol. The language in this final letter reveals his psychology. His last act was not about protecting his children or even about devotion to ideology in abstract terms, but about establishing his unique position in relation to Hitler. Even in death, he sought Hitler's approval, and even in destroying his children, he performed for an audience. On the evening of May 1st, 1945, one day after Hitler ended his own life, the parents acted. The children were given medication to make them unconscious. The eldest daughter, Helga, who was 12 years old, reportedly resisted and may have understood what was happening. Nevertheless, all 6 children were gone. Joseph then ended Magda's life while she took medication. Finally, he took the substance himself and had an SS guard ensure his passing. Their remains were burned in the garden above the bunker, following the same procedure used for Hitler. Pomsel's response, recorded years later in her memoir, captured the moral clarity that the Goebbels themselves lacked. She said that Goebbels ending his own life made sense given his circumstances as he faced capture and trial. But involving the children was completely inexcusable, since a mother ending the lives of the children she brought into the world represented something beyond political extremism. She described it as brutal, cowardly, and unforgivable, judging that the people who caused the catastrophe, then escaped by destroying their own children, were craven cowards. This judgment cuts to the heart of who Goebbels actually was beneath all the performances. His entire life had been a performance of strength masking basic weakness. His control over others compensated for his inability to control his own compulsions. His conquests of women proved nothing except that power corrupts absolutely. Longerich's analysis suggests his devotion to Hitler was not loyalty based on principle, but dependence based on unresolved childhood patterns. His final act was not noble loyalty, but destruction of innocent lives to serve his own needs. The diaries that survived provided historians with extensive evidence of his delusions. In thousands of pages, he had constructed a narrative where he was sophisticated, devoted, and historically significant, carefully documenting his thoughts to shape how future generations would understand him. Yet, when these diaries are read alongside testimonies from people like Pomsel, they reveal only narcissism and self-deception. He had spent his life creating illusions for others, and in the end, he believed completely in his own lies about himself. Significantly, historians note his private compulsions mirrored the regime's broader obsessions. Just as he could not tolerate independence in women, the regime could not tolerate political dissent. Just as he manufactured false realities through propaganda, the regime created an entirely false world through terror. Just as he claimed moral superiority while acting immorally, the regime preached virtue while committing atrocities. Personal pathology and political ideology reinforced each other continuously. The Goebbels story demonstrates how individual psychology and totalitarian power become intertwined. His need for validation found expression in a system valuing appearance over truth. His inability to accept rejection aligned with a regime destroying all opposition. His addiction to performance flourished in a state built entirely on spectacle. Every personal flaw became magnified through political authority, and every political crime reflected personal pathology. What makes this history particularly disturbing is how ordinary much of it appears on the surface. The affairs, the vanity, the hypocrisy, none of these were unique to Goebbels, as men have exploited power throughout history. What distinguishes his case is the intersection with genocidal ideology, where the same impulse driving him to dominate women drove the regime to dominate nations, and the same inability to see others as fully human enabled both his personal cruelty and his participation in mass destruction. His legacy is not primarily about scandal, but about how the hunger for control, when given institutional power, becomes monstrous. It is about how insecurity, rather than being overcome through self-awareness, can be weaponized against others. It is about how manipulation, perfected in personal relationships, can be scaled up to deceive entire populations. Historians who examined his life, including Longerich and others, interpreted his final act not as repentance, but as final performance. He ended his life as he had lived it, staging his exit for maximum dramatic effect. The destruction of his children was his last propaganda act, intended to demonstrate the depth of his loyalty to Hitler, though this required ending 6 innocent lives, and apparently did not factor into his thinking at all. What Goebbels' story teaches about propaganda and self-delusion remains relevant. He demonstrated how someone can become so consumed by their own performances that they lose touch with reality entirely. He showed how personal needs for validation can drive political behavior with catastrophic consequences, proving that intelligence and education provide no protection against moral collapse when combined with insecurity and unlimited power. In the end, he could not exist independently. Without Hitler's approval, he felt he was nothing. Without women to conquer, he felt worthless. Without crowds to manipulate, he lacked purpose. The void at his core could never be filled because he had nothing genuine to offer anyone. Only performance, only manipulation, only desperate need to be admired by those he secretly despised. Goebbels' story ends where his loyalty began, in the dark confines beneath Berlin, as the empire he helped create finally collapsed into rubble. His final choice was to destroy his children and himself, rather than face a world where Hitler no longer existed. To understand how the man he worshipped met his own end, and how the final days of the Reich unfolded in that underground tomb, you should watch this story next.